This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I am in Fort Collins, Colorado, not very far from our office or my home, keeping it close in this kind of COVID era, but enjoying a face-to-face podcast today over at Odell Brewing with Chief Operating Officer for Odell Brewing, Brendan McGivney. Welcome to the podcast, Brendan.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. Appreciate you having me.
Well, you know, this is another one where I could have talked to you years ago when we got this thing started, and we've kind of waited for the right moment. Definitely didn't want to, focus too much on our backyard right here in Fort Collins, but I think given the circumstances and certainly given what Odell has done for the world of brewing, it's a merited conversation. I can't wait to dig in and talk about all the ways that you all use hops, choose hops, add hops into beer in a multitude of ways, and all the cool things that you've learned along that process. In the past, other brewers that have come through Odell and worked for Odell, like Joe Morfeld of Pint House Pizza, who we talked to on episode 50 of the podcast, spoke highly and credited you with their knowledge and learning in the world of understanding hops, selection, and everything else. And so I figure, we talked to Joe, we might as well come back and talk to the Jedi Master that instilled the knowledge right there in him. So looking forward to this conversation. Before we get started, nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Innovative modular designs and no proprietary parts propel G&D ahead as the premier choice for your glycol chilling needs. Breweries you recognize like Russian River, Ninkasi, Jack's Abbey, Samuel Adams, and more trust G&D to chill the beer you love. Call G&D Chillers to discuss your project today or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, Old Orchard supplies craft juice blends from the heart of Beer City, USA. As the industry blending experts, they supply major national brands and growing breweries alike. They've been the best kept juicy secret in craft beverage for years, but now the secret's out. Breweries across the board are experiencing a seamless transition to Old Orchard as their new juice supplier. So hop aboard the Old Orchard fruit train. Their sample kit starter pack is waiting for you at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. I'm pretty sure even other brewers that have worked at Odell at various points, like Chad Jacobson and some others that have also been on the podcast, I keep hearing your name a lot. And yet, before we started this, you mentioned that you'd never done a podcast before. And I love that.
Yeah, I like to kind of stay under the radar, honestly. Yeah. We have such a fabulous team here at Odell Brewing, and always have that. We kind of made a conscious decision long ago not to have a rock star or hero or kind of face of the brewery, because it truly is a team collaborative effort. So it is an honor to be recognized by folks that have come on through here, and I have a lot of respect for Joe and Chad and Zach Turner out at Single Hill and Yakima and others that have gone on to start their own breweries and do a great job.
But let's talk about Odell and let's talk about you. Talk to me about your history through brewing and how you ended up in this position now. Kind of COO is your title, but you kind of oversee all the brewing operations. Yeah,
I mean, when I started here, I think there were 3 or 4 of us in production total.
Yeah.
That was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we had to wear a lot of hats back then. And as we've grown as a company, I've been fortunate enough to grow as an individual and go back to school for training, and whether it was brewing or project management or executive MBA stuff, and just learn more about the business side of it and leading teams. So it's been a 25-year evolution to this position.
Is this your first brewing job?
This is. I was an underage home brewer at Colorado State University when I moved here right when Odell started.
Yeah.
So 1989, I was a 19-year-old student.
Yeah.
And I was brewing my own beer and kind of snuck into the homebrew club. And Doug Odell was kind enough to share his insight and techniques, and helped us all get better as homebrewers.
Yeah.
In fact, there were, Jeff Liebisch was one of the homebrewers, one of the co-founders of New Belgium Brewing, was also a homebrewer in that group. So, Doug deserves a lot of credit for kind of opening up doors for homebrewers to get into the professional brewing landscape.
And that cycle has continued in every generation of new breweries since then, where that, and that give back and that development and that growth in the home brewing market has turned out some of the most interesting and exciting brewers here today. But it's awesome to see that that's the way it's always been.
It has.
Yeah.
That's been, perpetuated. I would say going back to when I started here at Odell, we went to MBAA conferences and there were very few craft brewers around. It was mostly AB and Coors, right. And this is before InBev was involved. And the brewmaster and assistant brewmasters at Anheuser-Busch were sharing information with us tiny little craft brewers. So it's the camaraderie and connection of all brewers back then. I mean, I have to extend that out to the big brewers of the day. Yeah. I think it's a little different today, but that was that table was set, so to speak, by all brewers at that time.
So brewing in general was different, very, very different in 1989 compared to what it is today. If you're looking back at it, what are some of those kind of pivotal moments where you noticed things had taken not just like an incremental improvement, but kind of looking back, maybe made a big jump?
I think, as most brewers would probably say who were around in the 80s drinking craft beer, there's no doubt that Ken Grossman and Sierra Nevada set the stage with Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. I mean, they just changed the game completely. None of us knew that you could make a beer that was so fruity and delicious and full of Cascade hops. What are those, right? Like it was, what are hops? It's an ingredient you can't taste in a macro brew, but Sierra Nevada no doubt set the stage for me in craft brewing. And then kind of that next layer would be like a 90 Shilling from Odell or some of the, earlier craft brewers. But
and I love that. I mean, 90 Shilling being this kind of signature beer for Odell for the longest time, and I imagine it's shifted a little bit now, in the last decade. But for a lot of my formative craft beer experiences started in the mid 90s when I turned 21. And, that kind of Scottish ale or, a malt forward beer, that was what craft beer was, you know?
It had flavor.
And it didn't just have bitterness. I mean, bitterness wasn't a predominant driver in beer at that point. Talk to me a little bit about how, Odell's approach to what you make has shifted over those years. That, it's not that you've changed wholesale. Obviously, you still make a lot of 90 Shilling, talk to me about the process of adding new products into that mix of what that product development process used to look like and now looks like for you. And then, how you decide how things fit within that Odell family.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, the short, easy answer is innovation has always been a core value of this company. I mean, 90 Shilling in 1989 was like nothing else on the market.
Right.
So it was way out there, right? And then when we came up with our IPA in 2007, it was not like any other IPA on the market. We really decided to change the course of it. Was it was an arms race for IBUs back then, if you recall. And
unfortunately, yes, I do recall.
And that was the IPA, right? I mean, that was what people were looking for. And we decided, even though there's no data to support it, we just believed in a new focus on flavor and aroma and less on bitterness was really what we wanted to drink, honestly. And then we brought that to the market, and it came out and won back-to-back gold medals at GABF and World Beer Cup. It's like, whoa, we specifically set out not to fit the style guidelines. However, the beer was appreciated by world-class judges. So,
was the genesis of Odell IPA driven by a idea for flavor that then sought ingredients, or by what you were tasting and smelling in new opportunities coming out of hops growers in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, the stuff that the hop growers are doing and have done, consistently out in the Yakima Valley and Willamette Valley and in Southwest Idaho, it's amazing. I mean, there are new flavors and aromas coming out every year. The Hop Breeding Company and some of the other breeders out there are doing just phenomenal work. So there's always these new. I mean, consider them spices, right? You always have a new layer of spice to play with. And going out there at that time was kind of like, that's when the Simcoes and Amarillos were out and about, and they were so different than, your typical Cascade. And,
right.
And, for Odell IPA, to be totally honest with you, we leaned into Centennial, we leaned into Amarillo, and we leaned into Simcoe. And those hops weren't typically put together heavily on the dry hop side of things.
Yeah.
They weren't readily available necessarily. Not many people knew about them. So we did lean into those. And you're right. Some of that exploration out in the hop fields led to the idea that, hey, if we could translate these beautiful, fresh, fruity, complex aromas into a finished beer, that's a totally different ballgame than just talking about IBUs.
So you've been walking, in the hops fields and rubbing hops in Yakima for a long time now. How have those flavors and even some of those same hops varietals shifted and changed over time?
I think you see a lot more consistency now.
Yeah. Okay.
And when you talk about the work that some of the private companies have done, I mean, obviously there's a place for public varieties and there's a place for private varieties. We need both, right? And I would say the private, again, I'm going to Hop Breeding Company as an example. I'm not saying they're the only ones,
sure.
But we've seen some pretty big successes from that group in terms of Citra and Mosaic. And,
right.
Some of the hops we get to play with, and we got to play with, Mosaic before it was Mosaic. It was just it was a number, and we used it in a barrel aged beer. I mean, that was insane, but it was worth a shot.
Yeah.
And then, other people went on to dump it into IPAs with great success. So I think that those companies, Hop Breeding Company in particular, has done a fantastic job of ensuring quality. So they're out there, they're in the fields, they're making sure that their metrics are being met before they stamp their brand on it. I mean, it really is, that's the power of kind of the private breeding sector, is that, it's a brand that they're proud of and they're trying to build trust in it, and they've done a fantastic job of that. So I would say my answer is again, consistency. You see more consistency out of the private varieties than you do maybe the public ones, but all the hop dealers are doing a great job of vetting everything that comes in, and they provide a tremendous service for the brewers.
How much range do you see year to year in some of the core varieties that you use?
Yeah, I mean, it's agronomics, so it's most of it's out of your control. So it's really up to the brewer to adjust. I think one of the reasons we've been successful with some of our hoppy beers is that we're not so stringent on, I mean, like I said, IPA started with these three hops.
Yeah.
IPA has 9 hops in it, right? So every year,
9 hops,
9 different
that's
varieties.
Simple.
Yeah, right. So every year we're kind of fading some in and out based on the performance of that hop year or that crop year. So Mother Nature dominates. You can't when a blowdown occurs or voles get into your field or whatever may happen. It's you have to make the adjustment as a brewer and not just rely on the raw material. I mean, same goes for malt.
Yeah.
Some years are better than others. Some years have higher protein than others in the barley, and you just need to make adjustments in the brew house. That's kind of that art science again coming together.
I want to talk a little bit more about that, about how you incorporate that evaluation process into the overall brewing process. But before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Hopsteiner, your premium hop supplier dedicated to delivering quality hops and hops products in every package. Visit hopsteiner.com for a complete list of offerings or select shop hops to start ordering today. Also, Ska Fabricating is excited to introduce the newest player in their all-star lineup of canning line automation, the Magic Bus, a fully automatic can depalletizer with pallet management. No more pouring time and labor into the manual handling of pallets, top frames, and tier sheets on your canning line. Packaging teams can simply load cans, deband, and press start. To learn more, contact Ska Fab today at 970-403-8562 or reach out online at skafabricating.com. Brewers also always talk to me about how they change and make some changes as things like this crop year might change. But I'm always fascinated by what that feedback loop looks like. What is that genesis, and how do you evaluate, say, now this new crop year, or some of these, or the standards of this batch that just came in, from the hop supplier that was part of our selection. But, how do you go through that validation process and say, yes, this is what we rubbed in Yakima and what we ordered, and this is meeting the spec that we sent, or this doesn't quite hit us the same kind of way, and maybe this is now aging in a different way than we might have expected it to, because it's been sitting for 6 months since we rubbed it. Like, what is that? I know you all have a very stringent approach to that at Odell. What does that look like for you all?
Yeah, you hit it spot on, Jamie. I mean, there is evolution. There's oxidation in the hop, right, over time, and some varieties degrade faster than others. And as you get to use those varieties, you understand, like, for example, a Centennial is not going to last. It's going to fall apart on you pretty quickly. The hop storage index is high typically for that variety. So you take that into account. And so we do the evaluation, the organoleptic evaluation at hop harvest.
Yeah.
But then we do it ongoing. So as the brewers are opening up a new box of hops, the directive is to give it a whiff. Let's check out the pellet, because it could be a processing thing. It could be a bag that was popped along the way or something like that. So we are evaluating not only at the crop year, at harvest, but also
every time
we open a box, we're doing a kind of a mini evaluation. And again, our team is so strong; everyone gets it, and believes in it, and goes through that process.
And so, if somebody senses something that they think is off, what does that look? What's that process?
Yeah. So they'll raise their hand, and we have a group that we call the RAD team, the R&D team, that'll kind of get together and quickly evaluate the situation and say, oh, all right, we found this box. Maybe this box got wet or something happened along the way. We do make sure we ship our hops cold. But in the past, maybe you'd get a box from a supplier that was shipped warm and it expanded and caused trouble. So we'll make a determination based on what's happening right then and there, whether we just eliminate that one box or is it a whole batch thing. So we'll dig deeper and deeper until we get the answer, and then we make a recipe adjustment.
You ship all your hops cold?
Yep.
I imagine. I
mean, we pay for.
You've tested it both ways, I'm sure. What do you find the difference?
Yeah, we've been doing that for a long time, and oxidation just comes down to temperature and time. So if you can keep your temp down, you can extend your time. It's that simple.
Then as you're making that kind of evaluative in broader strokes, as some of these bigger things change year to year, you mentioned pulling hops into and taking them out of. Even core brands like Odell IPA. What's that decision-making process look like, and how do you go through that kind of evaluative, thing?
Yeah, that's, a lot of times it doesn't just come down to how that hop performed, but we look at it more holistically. And one of the reasons we design recipes the way we do with so many different layers of hop varieties is we want to make sure that what we're using also works for the grower. There's only so many acres out there.
Yeah.
So we're not going to demand that this dog of a hop continue to be produced. We need to work with the growers. We need to work with the suppliers to make sure that this thing is sustainable for the long term. We can't just add more acres as time goes on, right? We need to find more efficient hops and ways to use hops. And so being part of that conversation is really important to me personally, that we are working with the growers and the dealers to determine what makes sense for the industry, not just for you and your brand.
Tim Matthews from Oscar Blues said the same thing to me when I talked to him last year.
That's because Tim's a really smart guy.
Tim is a very smart guy. I agree. And talked about that same kind of thing, that piece of these hops needing to work, even new hops needing to work in an economic way for all of these growers. And he was making a very pitched argument for non-proprietary approaches to hops for that same very reason, that the more acres that hops growers can grow of these things, the more cost effective it is for them to do it, the more they can insulate themselves from some of the potential downsides of this, and it just makes it more agronomically viable. But you're even stating that for some of these older hops varieties, just because it was a part of your recipe, 5 or 10 years ago, doesn't mean that other brewers want to use that hop now. How many hops have you made that kind of shift with and said, hey, okay, now this is just not feasible for you to grow at a cost-effective rate. We can find something that's going to get us the same place and do it in a way that works better for you all.
Yeah, that's there's been quite a few of them, honestly, and it's not a hard cut. So I'll use Perle as an example. That was a hop we loved. We used it all over the place, but it just wasn't agronomically strong. It wasn't worth. The yields were bad, and the inputs were high, and the consistency was not there. And as the acreage started dropping, it's like, we're not going to fight to keep this hop in the ground when it really doesn't make sense for anybody.
Yeah.
So we started a slow process, over a couple of years of starting to tweak recipes and look for other hops that would not only, it's not a direct replacement, right?
Yeah.
One of our overall themes is always better. So we're always trying to improve our existing process, our recipe, our benefits, our pay. I mean, always better is a driving force for this company. So when we look at a recipe and we know, I can see 2 years down the line, maybe Pearly's not going to be as viable as it is today, then we start that process. So it's a slow tweak and ultimately leads to a better end product, but isn't a hard cut. So people are confused.
Interesting. So you just kind of phase it out and then blend in gradually over time. That's an interesting strategy. You're using the similar crop year and just spreading it out for a little bit, or
you want to maintain the flavor profile of the brand.
Right.
And you can do that with lots of different hop varieties. If you're a good brewer, you don't need to rely on the two that you built your recipe on, right? You can start tweaking and playing. And we have the benefit of having 2 R&D facilities. We have a pilot system here in Fort Collins and one down in Denver. So we're constantly playing not only with brand new ideas, but tweaking existing brands just to see, how this could work. And then we do it on the big system if we can prove the concept on a smaller scale.
Give me an example of something that you've played around with and tested, whether it's worked or hasn't actually worked for you.
On the new product development or
Sure.
So Sippin' Pretty is a great example. So that's our fruited sour.
Right.
It's not over the top sour, it's kind of it's a more sessionable sour, so to speak.
It's tart beer. It's not a sour beer.
Right. Yeah. It's a kettle sour. So we have a kind of a lacto reactor on the side in our brew house that we use to inoculate the wort, and we set up a pretty fun little process to cool it down and maintain temp, and we get our pH and our TA exactly where we want it, and then we hit the boil and then send it to the fermenters, add fruit and yeast, and go for it. But that was a beer that started from Brent Cordell. He's our pilot brewer down in Denver, and he made a guava goza. Just like, hey, I'm going to try this guava goza. I'm like, cool, man, go for it. And people went nuts for it. I mean, the consumer absolutely loved it, demanded it. It flew. It was our best seller. So we said, all right, well, let's take that feedback and bring it to the market. So we brought it back up to Fort Collins and released Sippin' Pretty, which is a tweaked version of the original guava goza from Rhino. So that would be an example. And going back to our IPA, I think we brewed at least 10 different pilot brews of IPAs here before we decided, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then we brought it up to the big system. So we do that regularly when we come up with new brands. Innovation is just at our core, right? That's important. So for IPA, for example, we divert some wort into some pilot tanks and dry hop them differently, right?
Okay.
And then we could evaluate those 3 separately as unique beers and decide what we liked or didn't like about each one. And we always have the permission to dump it. We kind of go into it. We know if you're going to innovate and you're really going to push the envelope and try new things, you are going to lose beer. You are going to fail. If you don't fail, you're not trying hard enough. So we build that into our model to say, we know we're going to be dumping some beer, especially on the pilot system. So let's plan for it and not feel bad when we do it, because we learn something every time.
Yeah.
So that's how we'd handle IPAs, really splitting some wort that we're sending to the big tanks into the little tanks and dry hop them differently.
Is there one hop that might be an Odell IPA that no one would ever expect is in that beer?
One hop that no one would expect, huh? I don't know. What do y'all expect?
You got 9 hops. That's a lot of hops to choose from, right there.
It is, yeah. I'll give a nod to your sponsor there, Steiner. We have some Bravo in Odell IPA. Yeah, that's one of the Steiner bred bread hops. That's really beautiful hop. I think it's based on Nugget. I think was one of the parents there, and really stable, really pleasant hop that does some fun things when you dry hop with it. So,
what from a sensory perspective, what do you find that's fun or interesting about it?
That one kind of shifts around based on ABV, so it really has a wide range. I would encourage folks to play around and see what not just Bravo, but all hops actually. Different yeast strains and different ABVs will give you some different aromas, and it's just one of those things you got to try to figure out what you like and what you're getting out of it. But on the higher ABV side, you'll get more pineapple. Tropical kind of, and lower you get a little more pleasant grassy citrus kind of notes.
Let's talk about hops terroir for a little bit. I know it's a popular subject, and maybe we read a little more into it than we should. Maybe we don't read enough into it. From your perspective, tasting or rubbing hops from similar varieties from a number of different growers in different states, how broad is the difference for you, and do you find yourself finding specific terroirs for some of your hops that you like more than others?
I know this comment's going to piss off some of my friends in the hop industry, but we actually find great variation.
Sure.
So an Oregon Cascade to us is a different variety than a Washington Cascade.
Yeah.
An Idaho Chinook is a different variety than an Oregon Chinook to us.
Sure.
Now, I'm not saying that that's for everybody, but we find that there are some consistent flavor profiles associated with locations for sure.
Yeah.
And that's my personal opinion. And I know some people, to protect the brand or the variety, like to say they're, a Cascade's a Cascade or whatever it may be, but there's no doubt in my mind that the terroir is important.
It's, I think it's such a tough question, that you could also state that brewers shouldn't even list the hops that are in it, that, that a chef doesn't talk about which spices they use to make a specific dish because you're giving away, the secrets in that regard. But we also find that from a marketing perspective that consumers enjoy specific tastes of certain things, and when they find something that they like to taste at brewers other expressions of that kind of thing. It's a challenging one, and this is one we're in the middle of our IPA issue for craft beer and brewing right now, and tasting through all of these IPAs, I've found that even with our blind review panel, if it's a Nelson IPA or a Sabro IPA where Sabro is a giant component of it, I have to tell them, they can't just blindly review that because it tastes completely different than the Citra Mosaic beer they may have had just before that.
Yep.
And so trying to judge those two things on the same scale is unfair to either one of them. Generally, that Citra Mosaic beer is going to be way sweeter and just brighter and juicy citrus, but that Nelson Sauvin beer is not going for that. Generally, speaking, it is going for usually a drier approach. And that kind of thought hit me like, are we at this point where we need to start talking about hops varieties in the way that wine growers talk about wine grape varietals, that they are now starting to have so much impact on the flavor expression of these beers that not knowing what those are negatively impacts the consumer perception of them?
Yeah, I think we've moved there already, honestly, with, I think Citra is probably the best example where, there are lots of Citra named beers, right? If someone's using Citra predominantly, they can't wait to tell you that it's Citra because the consumer loves Citra, right? It's a beautiful hop, and people want Citra. So the brewers are quick to point out when there's Citra in their beer, I think. So I think we're already there. The Sabro comment is interesting, or Nelson, or those hops are such outliers, right? That I think it's cool to be able to communicate to the customer like that's what you're tasting. So they're somewhat polarizing, perhaps.
They are. And I've had plenty of judges say, I either love Sabro or I'm not a big Sabro fan.
Right.
And so at least knowing that can explain to them why they may or may not. Now I smell something like, oh, that's woody, coconutty. Oh, yeah, that's Sabro beer. It becomes kind of a signature identifiable thing. But if you're trying to judge that towards some sort of mean of fruity, hazy IPA, it's going to take you in a different direction than that and not deliver that.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, some of those outlier hops, there's a public variety that I think is super interesting that we play around with called cashmere.
Yeah.
And, agronomically, we're trying to figure out, does it make sense? But, again, it's a public variety. And it can do some beautiful things in beer, but if you lean on it heavy, you're not going to like it perhaps. But if you can feather it in, and I would say the same about a Sabro or a Nelson, like you don't necessarily have to hit the customer over the head with it.
Yeah.
You maybe can layer it in and bring up some highlights of other hops. Hops play together differently.
Sure.
So, that's one of the things with the combos that we do is we realize that, hop A combined with hop B is very different than just hop A or just hop B. They do play off each other and create new flavors and aromas. So I think there's a place for all the hops that are out there, honestly, and it's up to the brewer to use them a little more tactfully. They don't have to be single hop, like wham, here's your Sabro, taste it. It's like, hey, there's a little layer of tropical in there somewhere. What's that coming from?
Yeah.
So I don't know that we need to I would hate to just have Citra IPAs and Mosaic IPAs and Sabro IPAs. Like, I think we need that layer. We need that complexity. We need that brewer freedom and creativity to create beautiful end products without necessarily hanging your hat on the brand or the variety of the hop. So I'd like to see it maybe even less of that, honestly. I would not want to be in the wine world where I like Merlots or I don't like Merlots. Well, have you had all the Merlots? Like, in IPAs you can do.
And still, wines sold as Merlot generally have a blend of other grapes in them too.
Yeah, because maybe that was a bad example.
No, well, and Cabernet Sauvignon, the same kind of thing. Nobody wants to drink 100% Cabernet Sauvignon wine. It's going to be unbearable, but with smaller percentages of other things, it just creates this bigger, rounder, softer, piece. I want to talk to you about those kind of point guard hops, those hops that are really good at delivering, even
point
if they,
guard, there you go.
Even if they don't score themselves, like the ones that are really good at dishing it off and setting other hops up to score. But before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Brewers Publications, publishers of Historical Brewing Techniques, The Lost Art of Farmhouse Brewing by Lars Marius Garshall. Equal parts history, cultural anthropology, social science, and travelogue. Historical Brewing Techniques describes Northern European farmhouse brewing and fermentation methods that are vastly different from modern craft brewing. Order your copy of Historical Brewing Techniques today at brewerspublications.com. Also, Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions give you a year of the print and digital editions of the magazine, plus access to our library of video courses, special deep dive email only for all-access subscribers, premium content, and all-access exclusive merchandise. Go to beerandbrewing.com and click on the subscribe button to join now. And I've had other brewers talk about that kind of piece and effect of some of these hops that they use, not as their supporting role. They're not the leading man. They're not that necessarily that hop you're going to put on the label that's going to sell that beer. But they have interesting effects. And so if you mentioned cashmere, are there hops, primetime hops, the center hops that are going to, go take the alley-oop and make the dunk, that work particularly well with that? And there are some other examples where you find some of these, kind of role-playing, hops help bring out some key features and set some of these other hops up for success.
Yeah, I love the point guard hop. That's a great term.
I worked for Inside Stuff and Hoop magazines for about 4 or 5 years. Nice. And so I've got my basketball analogies stacked back here.
I'm missing hoops right about now.
Yeah.
I think it's coming back soon.
Yeah.
To me, hands down, it's Cascade. Cascade is, it just plays well with others. It really does. We use a whole lot of Cascade. It's a beautiful hop. It's getting a little long in the tooth. I think the growers are going through a process right now of trying to get some clean root stock in the ground, and hopefully that'll continue, and the brewers will contract appropriately. I think that's a problem right now. I think brewers are getting a little used to the spot market right now, and we need to communicate to the growers what we want in 2 or 3 years, because it takes a while. If you change out a field, you're changing out a variety. I mean, that's a long-term commitment. And I'm afraid that the brewers are getting a little too comfortable with not contracting. And I guess I'd like to make a plea to really take a step back and evaluate how important the hops are to your beer and your business, and communicate with the dealers and the growers to make sure they know what you need so they can put the work in that they need to well in advance to make sure you have those varieties down the road. And I think Cascade, unfortunately, is one of those hops that's probably under contracted, one man's opinion.
Yeah.
And, the usage has gone down, but it's a beautiful hop. That's my point guard, hands down. I'd say some other onones for us in the past were Willamettes.
What do you like, if you're using it with another like big name hop or leading hop, what kind of percentages do you tend to find yourself using Cascade in to just like bring out that little bit of classic C hop flavor and in the bigger mix?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me without looking, having our recipes right in front of me. But it is one of the 9 in IPA, Odell IPA for sure. But it's not necessarily in all of our IPAs.
Yeah.
But I just think that is a really nice base layer that you can build upon with some of the more impactful hops. It's just there's nothing unpleasant about a Cascade, right? And
it's I think it has this kind of grounding flavor, like this classic craft beer flavor. It's just associated with it, thanks to Sierra Nevada in large part, you know. And so it builds that familiarity and that kind of connection to the flavor that you can then take in other directions, but it just it gives it that kind of air of familiarity. Are there some other some other variations like that you find compelling and interesting?
Yeah, again, I think Willamette's one of those. It's less impactful, a little more background, but that's one we've traditionally used. We use less of it now, but in the past, we traditionally layered that one in as well. But that's, yields on Willamette are a little tough, so we've tried to back away from that.
Yeah. On the question of contracting versus spot, there's certainly a precedent, even in the hops and ingredient world, for dramatic, tragic shortages of these kinds of things, and it certainly will happen again. It is not that hard or that expensive, as you say, to kind of prepare for potential downside and give the agricultural side of the business some of the security that they need, but also securing that kind of guarantee, of your own ingredient supply at the same time. Yeah,
it's worthwhile work to put that time in to figure out, at least an estimate, because our hop suppliers are our partners, right?
Yeah.
I mean, across the board, we have amazing companies. I mean, all these guys out there are doing a fantastic job, and they're going to work with you.
Yeah.
So let's communicate. That's the key. Communicate with them what you think you'll need, and inevitably that will change, right? You will be wrong. Don't worry about it. You will be wrong. But then communicate as soon as you know you're wrong that, actually, I don't need, 8 billion pounds of Mosaic. I really need Citra, or I really need, something else. Just communicate with them, because that's what they do. They do it really well. And trust that your hop partner is just that. They're a partner. They want to make sure the right hops are in the ground and that they're available to you. Nobody wants to tell you can't buy any, right? They want to sell you the hops. They just need to know that you need them. So communicate.
You mentioned earlier that rootstock was getting a little bit long in the tooth. What did you mean by that comment?
Yeah, so over time, hops will, whether they're attacked by virus or there's, off types that make their way into a field. Fields need to be cleaned up. They're not, forever. And Cascade is an older hop, so the growers have done a fantastic job of going through this process of cleaning them out and putting new fields in and new clean rootstock, verified virus-free clean rootstock in. And that's a major investment. It needs to continue to happen, but it will only happen if the brewer is communicating to the grower that we will continue to need that variety in the future.
Yeah, it's almost like they need to name the new Cascade something new, just so it sounds sexy and fun and marketable to consumers, just so that brewers will contract for it and buy it and move forward. What is your, as you all are envisioning hops blends, how do you, say for a new beer, and you all have launched a few new ones lately, how does that kind of creative process look for you?
That really does start with the pilot system. It starts with harvest and then moves to the pilot system. and then we'll do quite a few iterations on a small scale till we figure out, this is something.
How do you decide what the iterations are going to be?
Again, I would say we take it back to our very small rad team. It's myself and a couple others that we'll put our heads together and just try some things out. We'll bounce ideas around and then go for it. And then we'll run it through panel, which has there's no skin in the game there. They're just blind samples. And if panel approves, and it'll move to the tap room. And then if the consumer approves and it really enjoys the flavor profile, then we'll talk about, can we actually get enough raw material to make this a full-time release? If so, when? And then kind of go through that process of bringing it up to full scale.
How much time is it between the kind of ideation process and, piloting and then go to market?
This beer you're drinking right now, this Good Behavior, has a hop in it, HBC 586. That's been years in the make. I've been waiting to be able to take this. Bring this hop into a full-time beer. So this one in particular, I would say took probably 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you had this idea that this thing might work well in a lower ABV beer, and you just needed all the stars to align for that to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the technical processes behind adding hops. You all have, I remember a beer you released in the last couple of years called Rupture, where it was a fresh grind beer, making a case of taking those hops and grinding them before you add them to the kettle in order to, like you would with fresh coffee beans, grind right before you use them for kind of intense flavor. Talk to me a little about some of these varying techniques that you all have developed and what and why you find them, valuable.
I think I'm a little twisted. I'm a bit of a change junkie.
Yeah.
So when things like that kind of pop into my head, it's like, all right, who's with me? Can we do this? Can anybody in? And
Brian's got a crazy idea, guys.
Yeah, and a lot of times, our team is so strong, and they are much more technically and process sound than I am.
Yeah.
And they'll quickly tell me that's a ridiculous idea. We can't possibly do that. Do you know how inefficient that would be, you idiot? But this is one I managed to squeak through, and it's been fun to play around with, both Rupture and then Hammer Chain. And it started just, I think it was a harvest. I had some brewers cuts that I brought back, and I was going to do a pilot brew with all these brewers cuts. And I was like, well, I can't use them. The pilot system's not really set up to throw whole hops in it. So what am I going to do? So I kind of food processed them all. And the aroma that popped out of that food processor was mind-blowing. I was like, we got to do this. We got to figure out how to do this on a large scale. And that pilot beer turned out great with the fresh ground brewer's cuts hops from that harvest. So that's kind of where that one started.
Yeah.
And then grabbed our marketing guy. I was like, hey, I got an idea. He's like, we can't just do that right now. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to try anyway. And then they produced a beautiful artwork and got the message out there. And it's been a fun beer. And we've done some
do
other
that
things
from a technical standpoint?
We got a hammer mill. We put in a custom made hammer mill, and there's actually a pellet die on it, but we bypassed the pellet die for Rupture. We do make our own pellets for some other pilot beers, or when we're doing experimental hops, we can run it through there and use pellets. So it's nice to have that flexibility.
So you're just doing your own pelletizing right here in-house.
Yeah, I mean, it's, horribly inefficient. But
sure, that's feasible for every other brewer out there to just,
It takes a long time to process a few pounds of hops, but we did find ourselves in a position last year where the pellets weren't ready yet. Simcoe pellets weren't ready yet, and we had some whole leaf, so we actually made our own pellets to get by with IPA for a while, and they were great. So we don't want to get into the pellet making business. Let the hop dealers do that. They're amazing at it, and we suck, but we did figure out how to at least do small batches.
So for Rupture, you run it through this hammer mill. How soon before they go into a brew are you milling them?
It's hours.
Hours? Okay.
Yeah, we will not go beyond a couple of hours on that one.
How long does it take to, mill through all of those?
That's for the process guys, right, that know what they're talking about, not the dumb idea guy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can run through, I think it takes, I don't want to give you a bad number, but it doesn't take too long to rip through a bale. We can get through a few bales in a couple hours.
From a sensory perspective, relative to making the same beer with hops that have been pre-pelletized or with whole leaf hops. What do you find in a finished beer that process adds, just from a sensory perspective?
Yeah, and that's where we made the ultimate decision, is when we ran that through panel. We did some benchtop stuff with pellets, and then we did it with fresh grind from the same lot.
Yeah.
So we took our whole leaf, ground it up, dry hopped with it, and then our pellets from the same exact lot, dry hopped with it, and across, it was nearly unanimous over quite a few tasters that the fresh ground was preferred. So that was the ultimate decision, is that we truly believe this can make a better beer, so we're going to go for it.
Is there, do you remember the way that they might describe it, or how would you describe the difference?
Yeah, to me, it's like being at harvest. Honestly, it's when you take a brewer's cut and you just rub it between your hands, and that first flash of aroma, which is fleeting, but is so beautiful, actually came through in the beer. Now, it's an IPA, right? So you store it warm, put it on top of your fridge for a while, it's gone, and it gets real ugly. But when it's fresh and it's cold, it is a difference maker.
Yeah. Are there other techniques that you all have been playing with that have, whether it's how you dry hop or timing, through that kind of fermentation process, or other kind of hops usage techniques and processes that you found some interesting results from? Yeah,
we've played around a lot. I mean, I
got a sense.
I can't think of where we haven't used hops. I mean, we've done mash hops. We've done first wort. We do cool pool, where we'll chill all of our wort down to we'll go as low as 160 at times. And then dry hop or add to the whirlpool once it's at 160. And that's more of our keg beer. So the stuff we're doing at Rhino is where we're really pushing the edge, because it's not going in a package. We do run micro, and if it's if it comes in hot, we're not going to serve it. But it's definitely much more risky to do some of those things on a large scale. Yeah. But if we can prove it over and over that it's scalable, we will do it. So we have employed some of those techniques, and then obviously the dry hopping. I think a lot of folks have written about it and talked about it recently, but there's a lot to be said of that early dry hop and the difference in character of adding hops early in fermentation versus late, and different temperatures, different yeast counts, different yeast strains. So dry hopping is all over the place, from fermenter knockout hops to cold dry hopping and whole leaf and pellets and cryo and everything in between. We don't use any extracts. I mean, the cryo is as far as we go. Yeah. But I'm sure we'll play with it at some point.
Talk a little bit about the cool pool thing. I love the name. Just is fantastic.
Yeah, that's what we call it here. We actually have it in the SAP, cool pool.
Talk to me about the impact of whirlpooling at a lower temperature versus coming straight out of a boil.
It goes back to the original intent of Odell IPA, right? Really focusing on aroma and flavor. Yeah. And we use a hop back. We put in a big hop back, custom-made hop back in our large brew house, so we can use whole leaf hops after the kettle boil and after the whirlpool. And so there's another way we use, but we learned a lot through the hop back, that different temps going through the hotbed creates different flavors. So the bitterness will be reduced, right, at a lower temp. Right. And we found that you get some different flavors in the finished product than you would at a 190 or 200.
What does different mean?
It depends on the variety and the combo, but yeah, I think it's a more...
Different is not descriptive enough for
me.
Know,
yeah, you got me, cool. There's like a fuller, I don't want to say sweet, but when you use some of those fruitier hops, it has that perception of sweet that comes through to the finished beer. There's something going on there with the sugars and hopping at that temp that makes a difference. And you're not maybe we're not volatilizing as many, aromatic compounds because the heat's reduced. But the flavor profile is definitely different. We prefer it in some varieties and some styles, and it's more of a fruity, I would say. Sweet fruit would be if I had to sum it up, you get kind of a sweet fruit character in the finished beer.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about hop backing. It's a cool technique, but also has the potential to be pretty inefficient and like highly, like very expensive, especially when you deal with the amount of hops that you all use.
Yeah.
But it is a core part of your process. How do you balance, that kind of, desire for the flavor, impacts of hopping that way with being cost effective and making a product that's not just horrifically inefficient in taking an extraordinary amount of hops to make the same amount of beer?
Yeah, that's a constant challenge, and we fortunately we're an independent company.
Yeah.
Right. So we get to make that decision to say we're okay with being inefficient if we get this flavor that we believe will matter to the end consumer and will help drive our business. So we quite often make that decision.
Yeah.
Where we say, yeah, this will not be efficient. It would be more efficient to use extract, and it would be more efficient to not have a hop back, and it would be more efficient to automate absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But we get to make that call. And if we feel like we're making a better beer by using the hop back that takes more time and labor, we're going to do it. And that's our guiding principles are evergreen. Like we intend to be here for generations. We're not setting up to show strong numbers in the next year so we can then sell. We're driven, by purpose or people first company, and profit's kind of the outcome. But we're here for the long haul, and we're passionate about what we do. And one of our brewers, Johnny, he always says, I'm like, how's it going today, man? He's like, oh, it's good. I'm just making world-class beer with my best friends. So that's that's our goal, is to make the best beer we can. And it's a balance. Some beers are not very efficient, and others are, right? So we look at the whole portfolio rather than beat on a single brand or variety, and make sure that we have balance. And that's just brewing, right? Brewing is balance. You have malt, you have hops, you got yeast, you have water, and you got to balance all these things, right? To make even though an IPA is hop forward, it still has to be balanced with malt. If it was just empty and full of hops, it wouldn't be the same experience. So we look at our business the same way. It's a balance. We need to take care of our people. We need to make the best product we can, and then balance out the profitability to make sure it's sustainable.
Part of that process is always making the beer that your consumers expect and want it to be. Talk to me a little bit about, and as we do that, like, consumers' tastes have changed. I mean, consumers' tastes have changed even since 2007 when you launched Odell IPA, and what people expect and drink now, whether it's like the amount of haze that's acceptable or desirable in a beer, or whether it's what fruit character looks like in a beer, or the threshold now is completely different, or, that perception of bitterness, which was allowed to be more ragged in the IBU wars of the 2000s of the aughts, and now needs to be much more smooth and controlled and tightly expressed. How do you, in a broader sense, keep brands like Odell IPA that have this core audience and this revered kind of status in the world of craft beer, and also make sure that it still meets what consumers expect that beer to be?
Yeah, we just simply take that always better approach to it, and it goes for IPA, it goes for 90 shilling, we're constantly tweaking to make sure we maintain our brand profile. Yeah. So if we elevate something to, Odell IPA, I mean, honestly, right now it's our number one beer. Yeah. Right? It's an old IPA, which is crazy. A lot of people's older IPAs are having a hard time right now. But Odell IPA is our flagship today. Even through this coronavirus stuff, it's our driver. Yeah. So the work we've put into it to constantly tweak it and make sure we maintained our brand profile and meet the expectation of the consumer, but also quietly in the background bring up the notes that we know the new customer likes, is kind of that delicate balance of, it's not the exact same recipe that we launched, like I said, in 2007, right? We don't have Pearly hops in there. We don't have Horizon hops in there. And we've folded some other ones in that are better. And they bring out the highlights more that we really loved about that brand. So when we think about it, it's like we want it to smell like tangerines. We want this thing to be peach and tangerine with a little bit of pine and be a well-balanced. There's a malt base there still. The bitterness is clean. It's not over the top, but it's certainly not sweet. It's dry and drinkable, and you can have
Yeah.
another. And to me, I don't mean to pat ourselves on the back, but there's only a couple of beers I can think of personally that I think the last sip of the glass tastes better than the first one, and it's our IPA and it's Orval out of Belgium. And those are two of my go-to beers consistently, and there's certainly others out there, and people do amazing IPAs, but the way our IPA is layered, to me, it's maintained the original intent of the flavor profile, but it's also, we've increased some of the highlights.
Where does that idea of the brand live? Obviously it's not the recipe itself, because that can get tweaked here and there and adjusted over time and maybe dramatically different at some point than it used to be, 15 years ago. But where's that definition of what the brand is live?
Yeah, our lab team has done an incredible job of defining our brands and describing them. Again, like I said, we want some tangerine, we want some peach. There should be some pine in there,
so
a little bit of fresh weed. So our sensory is looking for those attributes in these beers. They have no idea what we've done with the recipe. So it's a totally blind panel that's then giving feedback to say you either are or not meeting the definition of this brand, the flavor profile of this brand. So we kind of have checks and balances within our system here to make sure that we don't get off track.
Yeah. From a lab perspective, are they, GC mass specking stuff and seeing do they have any kind of, no?
I mean, we have lots of instruments, but when I'm talking about the tangerine is not an evaluation of, what
the actual compounds.
What the spec says.
Are there any other projects that we haven't talked about that you're particularly excited about or proud of or learned something interesting from?
Yeah, I think some of, again, the R&D stuff to me is just so much fun. It's exciting. I honestly love coming to work every day with the people that we have here and the passion that we have for innovation. I mean, we're constantly innovating. And we have stuff in the works that'll be out shortly that's very different from what we've done. We just released wine for the first time, and we have folks on our team that couldn't drink beer anymore. Right? There's a health issue where they can't have. There's a barley allergy, and this coworker brought up the idea of, hey, we have this property next door. What if we started fermenting and blending and conditioning and packaging in cans wine and make really good wine? Like, not, there's some cheap wine on the market, right? Sure. We're talking about like kind of next level wine, and charge a little more for it to make sure we can get. In fact, we teamed up with one of our hop growers, Gail Goshi, to get some grapes from her farm that are grown right across the dirt road from hops, some strata hops that we buy. So that was an idea that came up through our coworkers because of a situation, someone who loved beer and is totally passionate about Odell, and said, I can't drink beer anymore. What if we looked at this? And he's not the only one. There are some other folks that are in the same boat. So we realized that we can service more people. Our purpose is building community through beer. And some people can't be part of that because they can't drink beer. They can't have gluten or whatever. So wine is a way to expand our community. It's on our campus. It's right next door. Yeah. And we just released it 3 days ago or something. I mean, it just came out this week. It's not even available. So, I mean, that was an exciting project that was going on the side. And we have more stuff like that that's on the way. So that stuff really, I love when a coworker just gets passionate and owns a project and runs with it, right? It's not something I need to be involved with or you need to work through the details, but we have so many great passionate people that'll run with those projects, and we have a handful of them. We have our first food endeavor happening in Denver. We'll be, hopefully, at the beginning of the year, we'll have a pizza place and brewery down in Sloan's Lake. Okay. So I'm spending a lot of time on that project. Yeah. And based on the success of Rhino, we decided, a third R&D system would just ramp up our innovation and be able to offer fresh beer to that community. And food was also a big part of it, where there's a passion for food internally. We figured, let's see what this looks like. Let's give it a shot. We don't have any tap rooms where we don't produce on site. So everything we produce at Rhino is served at Rhino, and that's it. So if you want to check out what Brent's doing down there, you can only go to Rhino and get it. Sloan's will be the same thing. So they are standalone small breweries where we can really push the edge of innovation. And we do have permission to just drain dump things, if it doesn't work, but we can try it out, and we get more opportunities to, we can run one concept on 3 different brew houses and see how they turn out. So we're excited about it. We're certainly not going to continue this process. It was just an ideal location.
Right.
And, one more opportunity to push innovation. So we're going for it.
In a recent reader survey that we put out to our readers, we got about over 4,200 responses, individuals responding to this survey. Nice, big, broad pool of data. One of the questions was how buying habits have changed, how you would describe your purchasing habits before the pandemic versus now through the pandemic. I'll pull that graph up here so I can get it right. One of the questions, the first part of the question was, I love, or how would you describe yourself? And that first one was, I love trying a wide assortment of beers from breweries I may or may not be familiar with. That would kind of describe the highly adventurous drinker, and so 63% of the audience before the pandemic described themselves in that kind of boat. During the pandemic, that dropped from 63.6% down to 36.6%. That's a huge 23-point drop in those who would describe themselves as being the most adventurous drinkers. On the flip side of that, on the question, I mostly buy tried and true beers I know I like. That's that buyer that just buys their core brand, what they love, and over again. Before the pandemic, 6.7% people described themselves that way. During the pandemic, 25.6% of people described that way. It seems like a colossal shift right now in this pandemic era where the idea of experimentation and taking risks on new beers has really dramatically shifted, and really shifted quickly for brewers. From your perspective, coming at it from this Odell point of view, is that something you've seen? How significant is it, and what does it mean? How do you adapt as a brewery to that?
Yeah, we fortunately we're in a position of balance where we do have some traditional brands that we've talked about. We've worked on consistently, like Odell IPA, that are fitting right into your survey. Odell IPA is doing quite well right now in the package. On the other side of the coin, we lost all that adventurous beer drinker because we lost our tap rooms, and that's where we produced our one-offs.
Sure.
And somewhere in between would be our new releases or our seasonals, and it's kind of too soon to tell. It seems like some of them are off to an amazing start, and others haven't had the sampling opportunity yet, because I think that more adventurous drinker hasn't quite gone out and tried a Whitkist. It's a grapefruit white ale that we just released that the sampling we haven't seen it yet. People haven't tried it yet. And typically we would see quite a bit of sampling initially, and then the consumer would decide based on their repurchasing behavior whether or not they like that brand or they don't. But we haven't even seen people try it the first time.
And try it. And,
or in the tap room.
In the tap room. Sure.
So we've seen every angle, and what we've seen absolutely backs up your survey. I mean, you guys are spot on with our experience.
Has that changed product rollout strategy for you for the next couple of months at least?
It hasn't. We put, obviously we stopped kegging everything immediately, right? Because all the bars are shut down, all the restaurants are shut down, our tap rooms are shut down. But we are going to start kegging next week as things open up again. So we shifted all of our production to package only.
Right.
We're not a national brand. We are still a regional brewery.
Yeah.
So we don't have the national footprint grocery situation. So we didn't quite offset our loss in draft. April was a brutal month. To be honest with you, we got hammered. But we kept all our coworkers
That's a pretty
on board.
common story.
Yeah. But we kept all our coworkers on board because we truly believe if you take care of the people, they'll take care of the business, and if you take care of the community will take care of your business. And we dipped into our charitable piggy bank, so to speak. We had a fund, the growing fund, of dollars we've allocated over the years just for charitable, that we basically emptied out for housing and food insecurity causes in Larimer County. So we dumped $160,000 into the community during this crisis, even though we're hemorrhaging money in April. But that again is a core belief as an evergreen company that we are, we need to take care of our people in our community in order to take care of the business.
That seems like a perfect segue into the question we generally end the podcast with, and that is, what does success look like for you? What does success look like for Odell Brewery?
For me personally, it's the day I retire, which is, I'll probably have to die first. But this company is in a great position to last for a couple more generations at least. That's our ultimate goal, is to be an everlasting company. We are not set up to sell or merge or do any of those things. We are an independent, long-term company, and that's our guiding light. I mean, every time we make a decision, we look to that long-term perspective of how do we keep this thing going for the long haul for our 150 coworkers and our community. And so success to me is I leave here and this place is in great shape to continue on the way it has, as the Odells have done, from founders passing it off to us. And we're 100% coworker owned. We have an ESOP piece, and we have management ownership piece, and the Odells still have a piece. So it's a nice balance. Again, the balance keeps coming up for us. But that success for me personally is that this business is set up to be successful long into the future when I'm done. Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. If people want to learn more about Odell Brewing, where do they find more about Odell Brewing?
This is where the marketing team would need to help me. I guess the website, and there's an Instagram thing going on.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll link to it off of the web story with this podcast. Nearly 2,000 breweries across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico partner with G&D Chillers. Old Orchard supplies juice blends from Beer City, USA. Hopsteiner is your premium supplier for quality hops and hops products. Scott Fabricating invites you to take a ride on the Magic Bus. Historical Brewing Techniques, The Lost Art of Farmhouse Brewing, is out now from Brewers Publications. And Craft Beer and Brewing's all-access subscriptions are the best way to support this very podcast. Brendan McGivney, Odell Brewing Company, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hey, Jamie, thanks a lot. This is great.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.